I remember the exact moment the vote passed. I remember it because the chamber was so quiet afterward, not from shock but from satisfaction. 17 species had just agreed to punish humanity, and every single delegate in that room believed it was the easiest decision they had ever made. I sat at my archivist station near the eastern wall, recording the proceedings the way I had recorded thousands of others, and I remember thinking that this entry would barely fill half a page in the official record. A minor enforcement action against a minor species. Nothing worth remembering. I have never been more wrong about anything in my entire life. My name is Vorath Senis. I am the senior archivist of the Galactic Council, and I have held this position for 31 standard years. My job is to document everything that happens in the chamber. Every vote, every debate, every diplomatic incident large and small. I am not a diplomat. I am not a military strategist. I am a record keeper. And I have always believed that records are the truest form of history. But the records I kept on humanity were incomplete, misleading, and in some cases dangerously wrong. Not because I falsified them, because I did not know what I was looking at. Humanity had been a provisional member of the Galactic Council for 11 years when the incident occurred. Provisional membership is a status the Council grants to species that have achieved interstellar travel, but have not yet demonstrated what the Charter calls sufficient cultural maturity for full participation. In practice, it means you can sit in the chamber, you can observe, you can trade within designated corridors, but you cannot vote, you cannot propose resolutions, and your objections carry no binding weight. It is, to put it plainly, a seat at the table with no plate. The humans never complained about this arrangement openly. Their ambassadors attended sessions, filed their reports, smiled politely when senior delegates spoke over them, and kept their opinions measured. But I noticed things over the years that should have told me more than they did. The way their trade ships always seemed to arrive ahead of schedule. The way their engineers asked very specific questions about technology they were supposedly too primitive to understand. The way their diplomats took notes on everything, not just the proceedings that involved them, but every vote, every closed session summary, every fleet deployment announcement. They watched us the way a student watches a teacher, carefully, patiently, and with a focus that should have made someone nervous. It did not. We were too busy being flattered by our own importance to notice. The incident that triggered the sanctions was, by galactic standards, unremarkable. A human cargo fleet was transiting through the Veshan corridor, a contested trade lane that 3 species claimed jurisdiction over, but none fully controlled. A Dravosi inspection squadron intercepted the fleet and ordered it to surrender its cargo manifest and submit to a physical search. This was technically within Dravosi authority, though the Dravosi had a well-known habit of using these inspections to confiscate goods they wanted for themselves. The human fleet captain, a man named Daniel Porter, refused the inspection. He cited a council trade provision that exempted provisional members from random searches outside their home corridor. He was technically correct. The Dravosi commander did not care about technicalities. He fired 2 warning shots across the bow of the lead freighter and repeated his demand. What happened next changed everything, though none of us understood it at the time. Daniel Porter fired back. Not at the Dravosi ship. He fired a single round into the empty space between the 2 squadrons, a gesture that in human military tradition apparently means something very specific. It means, I see your threat, and I am not afraid of it. No one was hurt. No ships were damaged. But the Dravosi were humiliated, and the Dravosi do not forgive humiliation easily. Within 2 days, the Dravosi delegation had filed a formal complaint with the Council, demanding sanctions against Earth. The charges were interference with lawful inspection, aggression against a sovereign military force, and violation of provisional member conduct standards. The proposed punishment was severe. A full trade embargo, a military exclusion zone around the Sol system, forced withdrawal of all human personnel from joint stations, and a formal diplomatic apology delivered by Earth's head of state in the council chamber. I expected debate. I expected at least some discussion about the legality of the Dravosi inspection, about the contested status of the Veshan corridor, about whether a single warning shot really constituted aggression. There was none. The Dravosi had powerful allies. The Korval owed them military favors. The Thesari depended on Dravosi shipping lanes, The Yenshu, who were old enough to know better, simply abstained. The vote passed in under 20 minutes. 17 votes in favor, 0 against. Humanity's provisional seat was suspended effective immediately. I watched the human ambassador during the entire proceeding. Her name was Lena Okafor, and she had served as Earth's representative for 6 years. She was a small woman, with dark skin and steady eyes, and in all the time I had observed her, I had never seen her raise her voice. She did not raise it now. She sat perfectly still while the charges were read. She did not flinch when the sanctions were announced. She did not protest when her access credentials were revoked on the chamber floor. When the vote was finalized, Councillor Reshon, the session chair, asked Ambassador Okafor if she wished to make a statement for the record. She stood slowly, looked around the chamber at the 17 delegations that had just voted to isolate her species, and asked a single question. "Is this decision final?" Reshon confirmed that it was. The sanctions would take effect within one standard rotation. Okafor nodded. She gathered her documents, placed them neatly into a case, and walked toward the chamber doors. She did not slam them. She did not look back. She did not threaten or curse or weep. She simply left, and the doors closed behind her without a sound. I have replayed that moment in my memory more times than I can count, and every time I see it, I notice something new. The way she folded her documents along creases that were already worn, as if she had prepared them for exactly this outcome. The way her staff, 3 aides who had been sitting in the observation gallery, stood and followed her without needing to be signaled. The way her footsteps were even and unhurried, neither too fast nor too slow. Everything about her departure said the same thing. She had known this was coming. She had planned for it. And whatever that plan was, it was already in motion. But I did not see any of that then. In the moment, I saw what everyone else saw. A defeated ambassador, walking away from a battle she could not win. The Dravosi delegation actually laughed. I remember the sound. It was a low, grinding sound that their species makes when they feel victorious, and it filled the chamber like gravel pouring into a metal drum. Several other delegations joined them with their own equivalents of laughter. The chamber was loud and warm and self-congratulatory, and I sat at my station and recorded all of it. I filed the incident under Minor Enforcement Actions, subcategory Provisional Member Discipline. I assigned it a priority rating of 2 on a scale of 10. I noted that the resolution had been swift, unanimous, and unlikely to produce complications. I saved the file, archived the session recording, and went home to eat dinner. 4 days later, I reclassified the file. The new category was Existential Threat Events, and the priority rating was 10. By then, the Dravosi had stopped laughing. By then, everyone had stopped laughing. Because in those 4 days, humanity did something that no species in the 9,000-year history of the Galactic Council had ever done before. They disappeared. Not slowly, not gradually, not in the way a wounded animal retreats to lick its injuries. They vanished, completely, simultaneously, from every corner of galactic space, as if someone had reached into the fabric of the galaxy and pulled out every human thread at once. And in the silence they left behind, something terrible began to grow. I did not have a name for it then. I do now. It was the sound of a species that had stopped asking for permission. The 48 hours after the vote were the quietest humanity had ever been in their 11 years among us. I know this because I checked the communication logs. I checked them because something about Ambassador Okafor's departure had lodged itself in my mind like a thorn, and I could not stop turning it over. The calm in her voice, the precision of her movements, the way she had asked if the decision was final, not as a plea, but as a confirmation, as if she needed to be certain before she activated whatever came next. I pulled the standard monitoring feeds for human diplomatic traffic. Every provisional member's communications were logged as a matter of course. Not the content itself, but the volume, frequency, and routing patterns. What I expected to find was a spike in outgoing messages, the kind of frantic burst that always followed a sanctions vote. When the Thesari were sanctioned 8 years ago, their communication traffic increased by 40% in the first hour as their ambassador desperately tried to negotiate a reversal. When the Coralli faced embargo, their traffic doubled and stayed elevated for a week. Human communication traffic had not spiked, it had flatlined. External channels, the ones we could monitor, showed almost zero activity. Their embassy frequencies were dark, their trade liaison channels were silent. Their cultural exchange networks had been shut down so cleanly that the carrier signals themselves had stopped. But the internal channels, the ones routed through humanity's own communication infrastructure, told a different story. I could not read the content. Human encryption was annoyingly sophisticated, more so than any other provisional member we had dealt with, but I could see the traffic volume, and it was massive. In the first 12 hours after the vote, internal human communication traffic increased by over 800%. Not a panicked burst. A steady, sustained, coordinated flood of data moving between Earth, its colonies, its research stations, and its military installations. I flagged this in my daily report and sent it to Councillor Radishan with a note suggesting that the pattern was unusual and might warrant further analysis. Radishan replied within the hour. He told me that humans were probably arguing among themselves about who was to blame for the sanctions. He said it was typical behavior for a young species facing consequences for the first time. He told me to stop worrying and focus on cataloging the upcoming trade redistribution proposals. I did not stop worrying. The withdrawal happened on the second day. I was in the archive chamber reviewing historical precedents for post-sanction diplomatic arrangements when my alert system began chiming. Not the urgent alarm, just the steady notification tone that indicated a change in status for a monitored entity. I opened the feed and watched the updates scroll past, and for a long moment, I did not understand what I was seeing. Every human diplomat, scientist, trade liaison, cultural attaché, military observer, technical advisor, and support staff member in galactic space was simultaneously departing their assigned posting, not requesting permission, not filing departure notices through proper channels, simply leaving, boarding ships, powering up engines, and heading for Sol system. I pulled up the visual feeds from a dozen different stations. On Corval Station 9, 2 human engineers shook hands with their alien colleagues, wished them well, and walked to the docking bay. On the Thesari research platform, a human xenobiologist carefully packed her specimens, left detailed notes for her replacement, and boarded a shuttle without saying goodbye to anyone. At the Joint Military Academy on Dravos Prime, 4 human instructors turned in their credentials, returned their issued equipment, and departed on a transport that had apparently been waiting for them in orbit. It was not an evacuation. Evacuations are messy, panicked, chaotic affairs. This was a retrieval. Every human knew exactly when to leave, exactly where to go, and exactly what to bring. Some of them smiled on their way out. A few offered handshakes and warm words to colleagues they were leaving behind. None of them explained why. None of them mentioned the sanctions. None of them showed any anger or resentment at all. They were polite, professional, and completely terrifying in their calm. The entire withdrawal took 31 hours. By the end of the second day, there was not a single human being in galactic space outside the Sol system. I confirmed this through every monitoring channel available to me. 11 years of human presence across 200 stations, 47 diplomatic posts, 19 research collaborations, and 8 joint military programs, all of it gone as if it had never existed. The Council treated this as capitulation. Councillor Rishan held a brief session to acknowledge the completeness of human compliance with the sanctions and praised the swift resolution. The Dravosi delegation submitted a proposal to divide humanity's former trade routes among council members. 7 species submitted bids for the research partnerships that humans had abandoned. There was talk of sending a diplomatic mission to Sol in 6 months to discuss the terms of humanity's apology and eventual readmission under stricter provisional conditions. No one asked the question that was keeping me awake at night. No one asked why the withdrawal had been so fast, so organized, so perfectly synchronized. Provisional members did not have the logistical infrastructure for that kind of coordinated operation. The Thesari, who had been a provisional member for 40 years before earning full status, could not have withdrawn from even half their postings in under a week. The humans did it in 31 hours. I began pulling records. Not the diplomatic summaries and trade reports I usually worked with, but the raw data feeds, shipping manifests, construction permits, energy consumption logs, resource allocation filings. The kind of boring technical documentation that no one ever reads because it does not make for interesting archive entries. I spent the next 18 hours buried in spreadsheets and databases, and what I found made the air taste wrong in my mouth. In 11 years of provisional membership, Earth had imported almost nothing. Their trade balance showed significant exports, refined metals, biological compounds, cultural media, but their imports were negligible. At first glance, this looked like a species too poor or too proud to buy from galactic markets. But when I cross-referenced the import data with their research requests, a pattern emerged. They had not been buying technology. They had been requesting access to it. Study permits, observation visits to manufacturing facilities, technical documentation for educational purposes. Every request was small, reasonable, and individually insignificant. A request to observe Corval shield harmonics testing, a study visit to a Dravosi propulsion laboratory, an educational exchange at a Thessari weapons design institute. Each one approved without question, because each one seemed harmless. But taken together, they formed a comprehensive survey of every major military technology in the Council's arsenal. Not just the current generation, the design principles, the theoretical foundations, the limitations and failure modes. The humans had spent 11 years politely asking to look at our homework, and we had let them, because we never imagined they could do anything with what they saw. Except they could, and they did. I found the construction records buried in Earth's colonial development filings, documents that were technically available to any council archivist, but which no one had ever bothered to examine. In the last 4 years, Earth had built 14 orbital facilities, classified as civilian research stations. Their energy consumption profiles, however, did not match civilian research. They matched heavy manufacturing, military-grade heavy manufacturing. I tried to send a priority alert to Councillor Narration. The message failed. I tried again. Failed again. I switched to backup channels. Every one of them returned the same error. The council communication relays in 3 sectors had gone offline. Not destroyed, not jammed, just dark. As if someone had reached into the network and gently, carefully, turned them off. I sat at my station in the silent archive chamber, staring at my dark console, and I felt something I had not felt in 31 years of service. I felt afraid. Not of what the humans might do, of what they had already done without any of us noticing. The silence that had settled over Sol System was not the silence of a defeated species licking its wounds. It was the silence of a door closing. A very heavy door. And we were on the wrong side of it. 5 hours later, the enforcement flotilla arrived at Sol. Councillor Narration had dispatched it the morning after the sanctions vote. 32 warships under the command of Dravosi Admiral Keth Voran, one of the most decorated fleet commanders in Council history. His orders were straightforward. Establish the military exclusion zone around the Sol system, broadcast the compliance requirements, demonstrate Council authority through presence and positioning. It was a standard intimidation deployment, the kind the Council had used against dozens of species over the centuries. The ships would arrive, park themselves in visible orbits, and wait for the sanctioned species to come crawling back with apologies and concessions. Admiral Voran's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, just beyond the orbit of the outermost planet. He broadcast the standard compliance demand on all frequencies. Identify yourselves. Acknowledge Council authority. Prepare to receive inspection teams. The message went out, and nothing came back. No response. No acknowledgement. Not even a carrier signal. Voran waited 2 hours, then moved his fleet inward, past the ice giants, past the gas giants, into the inner system. His sensor arrays swept everything. There were no human ships, no defensive platforms, no orbital weapons, no minefields, no energy signatures of any kind except the steady hum of a few civilian satellites around the third planet. Earth itself showed normal population activity, cities running, power grids operating, transportation networks moving, but there was no military presence whatsoever. The Admiral reported to the Council that the Sol system appeared to be undefended, and that humanity had evidently accepted the sanctions without resistance. He positioned his fleet in a holding pattern near the largest gas giant, a standard overwatch position that allowed him to monitor the entire inner system. He filed his report, set his crew rotations, and settled in to wait. I read his report from my archive station with cold hands and a racing heart. I knew, with a certainty I could not explain and could not prove, that something was catastrophically wrong. The humans had spent 11 years quietly studying every military technology we had. They had built 14 hidden manufacturing facilities. They had executed a flawless system-wide withdrawal in 31 hours. And now their home system was completely undefended. Nothing about that made sense, unless the defenses were there, and we simply could not see them. I began writing a warning. I never finished it. I need to state something for the official record before I continue this account. What the humans did to Admiral Voron's enforcement flotilla took exactly 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I know this because the flagship's black box survived the engagement intact, and I have reviewed its recordings 9 times in the course of preparing this testimony. I will never review them again, not because they are classified, because I cannot listen to the sound of 32 warship crews realizing simultaneously that everything they believed about their place in the galaxy was wrong. It began at the 14-hour mark of the flotilla's deployment. Admiral Voron's sensor officer, a young Dravosi female on her first deep space assignment, detected an energy signature rising from Earth's northern hemisphere. She flagged it immediately, because it did not match any known weapon profile in the Council database. It was too broad, too diffuse, too strange. It looked less like a weapon charging and more like a planet waking up. Voron ordered his fleet to yellow alert and requested a detailed analysis. His science team had barely begun their scans when the second set of signatures appeared. Not from Earth, from everywhere. 32 energy contacts materialized simultaneously around the fleet, not approaching from a distance, not emerging from behind cover. They were simply there, as if they had been sitting in the void the entire time, invisible, silent, and patient. One contact for every ship in the flotilla, positioned at optimal weapons range, inside the minimum effective distance of the Dravosi shield arrays. They had been there for hours, perhaps since before the flotilla arrived, perhaps longer. The flagship's passive sensors, when recalibrated after the engagement, found trace energy residues suggesting that at least some of the human ships had been in position for more than 2 days, drifting silently in the shadow of the gas giant's moons, while Voron's fleet parked itself exactly where they wanted it. The human ships were unlike anything in the Council registry. They were smaller than expected, roughly 1/3 the mass of a standard Dravosi cruiser. Their hull geometries were angular and strange, covered in surfaces that seemed to absorb sensor energy rather than reflect it. They ran cold, with almost no thermal signature, which explained why the flotilla's sensors had not detected them. They were not hiding behind technology. They were hiding behind physics, using design principles that Council engineers later admitted they had dismissed as theoretically impossible. A single transmission cut through every frequency simultaneously. Every speaker on every ship in the flotilla carried the same voice, calm, clear, and speaking perfect Dravosi. You have entered sovereign human space during an active state of hostility. You have 60 seconds to power down weapons and shields. This is your only warning. Voron was a veteran of 11 campaigns. He had fought pirates in the Thessari Expanse, border raiders along the Corval frontier, and insurgent fleets in 3 different colonial rebellions. He had never lost an engagement. He had never retreated. He was Dravosi, and the Dravosi do not surrender to threats, especially not from a species they consider inferior. He hesitated for 15 seconds. I believe those 15 seconds represent the moment his instincts were fighting his training. His instincts told him that something was deeply wrong, that a species capable of hiding 32 warships inside his formation, without detection, was not a species to challenge. His training told him that he was an admiral of the Galactic Council's enforcement arm, that he had 32 ships and superior firepower, and that backing down from a provisional member species would end his career. His training won. He ordered weapons hot and shields to maximum. He transmitted a response, declaring the human vessels in violation of Council sanctions and demanding their immediate surrender. The 60 seconds expired. What happened next lasted exactly 3 minutes and 41 seconds. The human ships moved first, and they moved in ways that should not have been possible. There were no formation patterns, no attack runs, no predictable trajectories. Each ship operated independently, choosing its own path, its own timing, its own targets. But they were not random. They were coordinated with a precision that suggested they were either sharing tactical data faster than any known communication system could transmit, or they were thinking the same thoughts at the same time. The first volley targeted the flotilla's engines, not the engine housings, not the general propulsion sections, but the specific power coupling nodes that connected each ship's drive core to its main power grid. These nodes were located in different positions on different ship classes, buried under layers of armor and shielding, and were not even visible on standard tactical displays. The human weapons found them anyway. 32 ships, 32 shots. 32 engines went dark simultaneously. The flotilla was dead in space before a single Dravosi gunner had finished acquiring a target lock. The second volley came 9 seconds later and targeted weapons arrays. Again, the precision was surgical. The humans did not fire at turrets or launch bays. They fired at power conduits, at targeting sensor clusters, at the specific relay points where fire control systems connected to the weapons themselves. Every shot disabled a system without breaching a hull. Every impact was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum physical damage. The third volley took out communications. Shield generators followed 4 seconds after that. Each system was dismantled in the exact order that would prevent the flotilla from mounting any kind of coordinated response. By the time Voron's tactical officer realized what was happening and tried to organize a counterattack, there was nothing left to counterattack with. I have studied engagements between warships for 31 years. I have reviewed thousands of battle recordings from dozens of conflicts. In every single one, there is waste. Missed shots, redundant targeting, friendly fire incidents, collateral damage. War is messy, chaotic, and imprecise, even when fought by experienced commanders with superior technology. This was not war, this was surgery. The human ships did not miss a single shot. They did not fire a single redundant round. They did not strike a single hull plate, a single crew compartment, a single life support system. When the engagement ended, 4 minutes and 11 seconds after it began, 32 Council warships were drifting powerless in the shadow of a gas giant, completely disabled, utterly helpless, and carrying crews that were entirely unharmed. Not one being died, not one was injured. The humans had fought a battle against 32 warships and had chosen, deliberately and precisely, not to take a single life. Admiral Voron's final log entry before his bridge lost power was 3 words long. He said, "What are they? Not who. What?" Because in that moment, watching his entire fleet dismantled with the casual efficiency of a mechanic removing bolts from an engine, he was no longer certain that humans were the species the Council thought they were. The flotilla sat in darkness for 11 minutes. Emergency lighting flickered on. Life support continued on backup power. Crews moved through lightless corridors, checking for damage that was not there, looking for casualties that did not exist. The Admiral sat in his command chair and stared at a tactical display that showed nothing because there was nothing left to show. Then the transmission came. It did not come to the flotilla. It came to the Council chamber, 900 light-years away, arriving simultaneously on every screen, every speaker, every holographic projector in the building. Later analysis confirmed that the signal had been routed through the Council's own communication network, using access codes that should have been impossible for anyone outside the senior diplomatic corps to possess. The humans had not hacked the system. They had walked through it like they owned it. Ambassador Lena Okafor's face appeared on every surface in the chamber. She was standing in what appeared to be a command center of some kind, a room filled with quiet activity, personnel moving between stations, displays showing tactical data I could not read. She was wearing a dark uniform I had never seen before, not the diplomatic attire she had always worn in the chamber. She looked tired. She also looked like someone who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. She spoke for 90 seconds. Her voice was level, her words were precise, and she did not raise her voice once. She said that Earth did not recognize the Council's sanctions. She said that Earth did not accept the military exclusion zone. She said that Earth would not be issuing any apologies, diplomatic or otherwise. She said that Admiral Voron's fleet crews would be returned unharmed within 12 standard hours. along with their personal belongings and enough emergency supplies to reach the nearest council outpost. Then she said something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She said, "You voted to punish us for defending ourselves. We want you to understand something clearly. What you just witnessed was us being restrained. If any council warship enters Sol space again without a formal invitation, we will not limit ourselves to disabling engines." She paused, and in that pause the entire council chamber held its breath. "Consider carefully," she said, "what we will do when we stop being defensive." The transmission ended. The screens went dark. And for the first time in my 31 years in that chamber, I heard absolute silence. Not the smug, satisfied silence that had followed the sanctions vote. This was a different kind of silence. This was the silence of 17 species, realizing that they had just kicked something they should not have touched. Then the noise began, shouting, accusations, demands for retaliation. The Dravosi ambassador was on his feet, slamming his fist against his podium, calling for a full military response. 6 other delegations supported him. The chamber became a storm of voices and fury, and for 20 minutes, it seemed like the council would vote for war right then and there. But I was not watching the ones who were shouting. I was watching the ones who were not. 3 delegations sat in perfect silence through the entire eruption. The Rathani, the Korval, the Yenshu, the 3 oldest civilizations in the council, species that had been traveling between stars when the Dravosi were still learning to build boats. They were not arguing. They were not demanding anything. They were looking at their data pads, scrolling through information with the kind of focused intensity that I had learned, over 31 years, to associate with very bad news. The Rathani ambassador, an ancient being named Sayul whose species measured their individual lifespans in centuries, looked up from his datapad and met my eyes across the chamber. I had never spoken to him directly. I was an archivist, and he was one of the most powerful diplomats in galactic history. But in that moment, he looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that turned my stomach to ice. It was not anger. It was not surprise. It was recognition. As if he had been expecting this, as if he had seen this pattern before in the long history of his species, and as if he knew exactly what came next. He looked away and returned to his datapad. I sat at my station and tried to breathe normally. Around me, the council raged and shouted and demanded vengeance. But I could not stop looking at those 3 silent delegations, and I could not shake the feeling that they knew something the rest of us had not yet discovered. Something worse than a 4-minute military humiliation. Something that would change everything. I was right, and what they revealed in the emergency closed session the following morning was worse than anything I had imagined. Military defeat can be rationalized. Every species in the Council's history has lost battles. The Dravosi themselves were defeated by the Korval in the border campaigns 3 centuries ago, and they recovered their pride within a generation. A lost engagement, even a humiliating one, can be explained away as bad luck, poor positioning, an unforeseen technological advantage. The ego heals, the fleet rebuilds, life continues. What cannot be rationalized, what breaks something fundamental in a civilization's understanding of itself, is the discovery that you were never as powerful as you believed, that the walls you thought protected you had doors you never knew about, and that someone else had been walking through those doors for years while you slept. The emergency closed session convened at first light the morning after the engagement. Councillor Reshan had spent the night fielding demands from the Dravosi and their allies for an immediate military response, a full battle fleet to overwhelm Sol System's defenses through sheer numbers. The argument was simple. The humans had 32 ships. The Council had thousands. Whatever technological tricks the humans possessed could not overcome that kind of numerical superiority. Rishan called the session to discuss the logistics of assembling such a fleet. He expected it to be a planning meeting. It became something else entirely. Rathani Ambassador Sayul requested the floor within the first 5 minutes. When a Rathani requests the floor, they are granted it without question. This is not a rule. It is a tradition, born from the simple reality that the Rathani have been right about nearly everything for 9,000 years, and even the most arrogant species in the Council has learned that ignoring them is unwise. Sayul stood slowly. He was old even by Rithani standards, and his movements had the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that patience was not just a virtue, but a survival strategy. He activated the chamber's central display and uploaded a data package that, according to the file properties, had been compiled over the previous 3 years. 3 years. The Rithani had been watching humanity for 3 years, not casually, not as part of standard monitoring. They had assigned a dedicated intelligence team to study human activity within and beyond Council space, and they had told no one. Sayul began speaking, and within 2 minutes, every voice in the chamber had fallen silent. The first revelation was about technology. The Council had assumed, based on Earth's provisional member status and their relatively short history of interstellar travel, that human technology was roughly equivalent to standard Council equipment, perhaps 1 or 2 decades behind the leading edge. This assumption was wrong in ways that Sayul described as profoundly disturbing. The cloaking technology the human ships had used during the engagement with Voron's flotilla was not a refinement of known stealth systems. It operated on a fundamentally different principle, one that bent sensor energy around the ship rather than absorbing or deflecting it. The Korval, who possessed the most advanced stealth technology in the Council, confirmed that their best systems could not achieve this effect. Their theoretical physicists had explored the concept decades ago and concluded it was not feasible with current materials science. The humans had apparently solved the materials problem without telling anyone. Their propulsion systems were similarly advanced. The acceleration profiles recorded during the 4-minute engagement showed the human ships maneuvering at rates that exceeded Council maximum by a factor of 3. Their weapons, whatever they were, delivered energy with a precision that implied targeting systems capable of resolving individual components inside an armored hull from combat range. The Council's best targeting technology could achieve that level of precision only in controlled laboratory conditions. The chamber absorbed this information with the grim acceptance of warriors who have just learned that their enemy has better swords. It was alarming, but not devastating. Technology can be matched. Research can be accelerated. Given time and resources, the Council could close the gap. Then Sayul delivered the second revelation, and the mood in the chamber shifted from concern to something colder. For the past 6 years, Earth had been operating covert observation posts in 11 Council member systems. Not military installations, not weapons platforms. Listening posts, small, carefully concealed sensor arrays hidden in the debris fields of uninhabited moons, in the radiation shadows of gas giants, in the sensor blind spots of orbital stations that the humans apparently knew about in intimate detail. These posts had been monitoring Council communications, fleet movements, diplomatic traffic, and political negotiations for at least 6 years. The Rithani had discovered them only because one of their own intelligence sweeps, conducted for entirely unrelated reasons, had stumbled across an anomalous energy signature in the debris field of their 7th moon. When they investigated, they found a device the size of a cargo container, packed with sensor equipment that operated on frequencies the Rithani had never thought to monitor. Further investigation revealed similar devices in 10 other systems. The Dravosi home system had 3, the Korval had 2. Even the Yenshu, whose system security was considered the most sophisticated in the Council, had 1, hidden so cleverly that it had been operating undetected for an estimated 4 years. The humans had been listening to everything, every fleet deployment discussion, every arms negotiation, every closed-session debate about military strategy, alliance formation, and threat assessment. When Councillor Reshan had dismissed my warning about unusual human communication traffic, his dismissal had almost certainly been intercepted and read by human intelligence analysts before I had even finished my shift that day. The chamber was no longer simply quiet. It was frozen. Delegates who had been shouting for war an hour ago were staring at their own data pads as if the devices might be compromised. Several ambassadors exchanged glances with their security teams. The Dravosi representative had gone very still, his aggressive posture replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like uncertainty. But Sayul was not finished. The third revelation was the one that broke the Council's nerve. Sayul said it simply, without drama, as if he were reading from a technical report. The humans, he said, had used the intelligence gathered from their listening posts to to conduct a comprehensive strategic analysis of every council member species' home system defenses. Not theoretical analysis, specific, detailed, actionable analysis. They knew the blind spots in every planetary defense grid. They knew which shield generators were due for maintenance and when. They knew the shift rotation schedules of orbital defense stations, which meant they knew exactly when each station would be at minimum crew and minimum readiness. They knew which supply lines were single-threaded and could be severed with a single interdiction. They knew which allied species were close enough to provide rapid reinforcement and which were too far away to arrive in time. The Rithani had obtained a portion of this analysis through means that Sejul declined to describe. He displayed a small section of it on the chamber's central screen. It showed the Dravosi home system, and it was annotated with the kind of precise tactical detail that military planners spend years developing. Entry vectors, target priorities, timing windows, estimated response times for every defensive asset in the system, casualty projections under different engagement scenarios. The humans had not prepared for a skirmish. They had not prepared for a limited confrontation or a border dispute. They had prepared for a full-scale war against the entire Galactic Council, and the analysis suggested they believed they could win it. Not easily, not without cost, but decisively. Silence held the chamber for almost a full minute after Sejul finished. Then the Dravosi representative stood and attempted to rally support for the retaliatory fleet. His voice was steady, but it lacked the fury it had carried the night before. He argued that the Council's numerical superiority would overwhelm any technological advantage. He argued that humanity's intelligence on Council defenses could be countered by changing protocols and repositioning assets. He argued that failing to respond would make the Council look weak and invite challenges from other species. The Corval delegation responded first. Their military advisor, a female officer with 40 years of fleet command experience, said 3 sentences. She said that numerical superiority is irrelevant when the enemy knows exactly where your numbers will be, when they will arrive, and what they will do when they get there. She said that changing protocols and repositioning assets across 17 home systems would take months, and that the humans would know about every change as soon as it was ordered. She said that the only thing more dangerous than looking weak was being weak and not knowing it. The retaliation vote collapsed. The Dravosi could not muster enough support to bring it to the floor. One by one, delegations that had been screaming for war withdrew their support. Not because they were cowards, because the mathematics had changed. The Council could assemble a fleet of 1,000 ships, and it would mean nothing if the humans already knew where those ships would go, what formations they would use, and which systems they would leave undefended in the process. After the session ended, Councillor Reshan found me in the archive chamber. He looked older than I had ever seen him, his skin pale, his movements slow and heavy. He sat down across from my station and asked me a question I will never forget. He asked me how we had missed this. I told him the truth. I said we missed it because no one was looking. I said that in the entire 11 years of humanity's provisional membership, not a single council member had requested a comprehensive strategic assessment of human capabilities. Not one intelligence brief, not one military readiness evaluation. We had assigned humanity a threat rating of negligible on the day they arrived, and no one had ever revisited that rating because no one had ever considered the possibility that it might be wrong. We treated them like furniture, I said. We saw them every day and never really looked at them. And while we were ignoring them, they were studying us with a focus and patience that we never imagined a species as young as they were could possess. Reshan stared at me for a long time. Then he asked me what I thought we should do. I told him I was an archivist, not a strategist, and that my opinion carried no weight. He said he was asking anyway. I said that in my 31 years of keeping records, I had documented the Council's dealings with hundreds of species. Species that were conquered, species that were sanctioned, species that were integrated, species that were destroyed, but I had never documented a species that was treated with contempt and responded by becoming the most dangerous entity in known space, without anyone noticing. I said that whatever we did next, we should do it carefully, because we were no longer dealing with a provisional member. We were dealing with something the Council had never faced, a species that understood us better than we understood ourselves. Reshan left without saying anything else. I sat in the empty archive chamber, surrounded by 9,000 years of recorded history, and I started writing my resignation. I had failed at the one thing my job required. I had failed to see what was right in front of me. I never submitted the resignation, because before I could finish it, my console lit up with an incoming transmission on a secure diplomatic channel. The identification header was simple. It read, Earth Diplomatic Corps, Office of Ambassador Lena Okafor. And the message was even simpler. It said, "We would like to talk. Not to the Council, to you, Archivist Senis, personally." I stared at that message for a long time. Then, I accepted the meeting. I almost did not go. Not because I was afraid of Ambassador Okafor, though I was. I had watched her face on screens as she calmly informed the Council that humanity could dismantle their civilization if provoked. Fear was a reasonable response to that kind of person, but fear was not what kept me sitting at my desk for 20 minutes, staring at the confirmation of our meeting, unable to make myself stand up. What kept me sitting there was shame. I had spent 11 years as the person responsible for documenting humanity's presence in galactic affairs. I was the one who kept the records, who filed the reports, who assigned the ratings and classifications that other council members relied on to make their decisions. Every piece of analysis that dismissed humanity as a minor concern had my name on it. Every report that rated them as negligible passed through my hands. And every single one of those reports was wrong, not because the data was fabricated, but because I had never once considered the possibility that the data might not be telling the whole story. The Council had chosen me for this meeting precisely because I did not matter. When Reshin informed me that Ambassador Okafor had requested a private dialogue and that the Council had agreed to send me as their representative, he did not dress it up in diplomatic language. He told me directly that no senior counselor was willing to face Okafor personally, that my archivist status made me expendable in the Council's hierarchy, and that if the meeting went badly, my loss would not constitute a significant strategic setback. He said this to my face, without embarrassment, as if he were describing the weather. I went anyway. Not because I was brave, because I understood something that Rishan and the other counselors did not. The humans had not asked for a senior diplomat. They had not requested a military commander or a political leader. They had asked for me, by name. And that meant they wanted something that only I could provide. I did not know what that was, but I knew that if there was any chance of understanding what humanity actually wanted, this meeting was where I would find it. The meeting took place aboard a human vessel in neutral space, halfway between Sol system and the nearest Council outpost. The ship that came to collect me was small, a diplomatic shuttle with clean lines and a hull that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. The pilot was a young man named Simon Grant, who spoke my language fluently and offered me a beverage during the transit that tasted like warm spices and something sweet I could not identify. He called it tea. Ambassador Okafor was waiting for me in a small room near the center of the ship. Not a conference hall, not a diplomatic suite. A small, simply furnished room with 2 chairs, a low table, and a wide window that looked out on the stars. There were no guards, no aides, no recording devices that I could detect. Just her, sitting in one of the chairs, wearing the same dark uniform I had seen in her transmission to the Council. She stood when I entered and offered me her hand. I had learned about this human gesture during my years of observation. It is a form of greeting that involves physical contact, something most Council species find uncomfortable. I took her hand anyway, because it seemed important, and her grip was firm but not aggressive. She gestured to the empty chair and sat back down. She looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes and lines around her mouth that I did not remember from her time in the Council chamber. She looked like someone who had not slept properly in days, maybe weeks, but her eyes were steady, and when she spoke, her voice carried the same calm authority it always had. She thanked me for coming. I told her I was not sure I had a choice. She smiled at that, a small, brief movement of her lips that did not quite reach her eyes, and said that everyone had a choice. That was, she said, rather the point. I expected her to begin with demands, terms, ultimatums, the things that powerful species deliver to weaker ones after demonstrating military superiority. Instead, she asked me a question. She asked me what I thought of humanity. I did not know how to answer. In 31 years of council service, no one had ever asked me for my personal opinion about anything. I was an archivist. My job was to record facts, not to have feelings about them. I told her this, and she nodded as if she had expected that response. Then she told me what the council had never understood about humanity, and she did it not with anger or pride, but with a weariness that made her seem much older than she was. She said that humans did not prepare for war because they wanted war. She said they prepared because they knew, from their own history, what happened to civilizations that could not defend themselves. She talked about her own species' past, about centuries of conflict and conquest and colonization, about peoples who had been erased from existence because they lacked the power to protect themselves. She spoke about these things without sentimentality, without self-pity, as simple historical facts that had shaped her species at the deepest level. Every human child, she said, learns one lesson before any other. If you cannot fight back, you will be erased. Not might be, will be. It is the oldest truth we know, and we carry it with us the way we carry our bones. You cannot see it, but it holds everything else up. She told me about the 11 years, the real 11 years, not the version I had documented in my archive. She described what it was like for human delegates to walk through the council corridors and be ignored, talked over, dismissed. How human proposals were rejected without being read. How human trade ships were inspected at 10 times the rate of any other species. How human scientists were denied access to research they were fully qualified to participate in. How human diplomats were assigned the worst offices, the worst schedules, the worst seats in the chamber. None of it was technically illegal. None of it violated any specific council regulation. It was simply the way the council treated species it did not respect, through 1,000 small cruelties, 1,000 casual dismissals, 1,000 moments that individually meant nothing, but collectively communicated a single message. You do not matter. You will never matter. Accept your place, and be grateful. We allow you to sit in the room at all. You treated us like children, she said. So we grew up, quietly, while you were not watching. She paused and looked out the window at the stars. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Not harder, but more focused, as if she were choosing each word with the same precision her weapons officers had used to disable Voron's fleet. She said that Earth did not want to destroy the Council. She said that Earth did not want to conquer anyone, rule anyone, or dominate anyone. She said that what had happened to Voron's flotilla was not an act of aggression. It was a demonstration, a proof of concept, a way of saying, in a language that the Council could not misinterpret, that the era of treating humanity as a lesser species was finished. Then she presented Earth's terms. I had expected demands. Territory, reparations, the dismantling of the Dravosi military, forced concessions from every species that had voted for the sanctions, the kind of punitive conditions that victorious civilizations impose on the defeated. I braced myself for the weight of them. The terms were nothing like that. Full council membership for Earth, not provisional. Full voting rights, full participation, full standing under the Charter. Equal trade access, no more discriminatory inspections, no more restricted corridors, the same commercial rights as every other member species. A formal independent review of the Dravosi blockade incident, conducted by neutral parties, with findings binding on all parties involved. And one more thing, the establishment of an independent oversight body within the Council, with representatives from every member species, empowered to review and prevent the use of sanctions and enforcement actions as tools of political intimidation against smaller or newer species. Not just for humans, for everyone. I read the terms 3 times. I looked up at Okafor. She was watching me with an expression I could not identify at first. It took me a moment to recognize it, because I had never seen it directed at me before by a human. It was patience. She was waiting for me to understand. I asked her why. I said that Earth was in a position to demand anything it wanted. The Council was afraid. Its military had been exposed as inferior. Its intelligence had been compromised. Its political unity was fracturing under the weight of fear and recrimination. Earth could have dictated terms that would have reshaped the entire galactic order in its favor, and the Council would have had no choice but to accept. Instead, she was asking for fairness, not dominance. Fairness. She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. Because the point was never to destroy you, she said. The point was to make sure you could never ignore us again. Any of us. I did not understand that last part immediately. I asked her what she meant by any of us. She leaned forward and spoke with an intensity that I felt in my chest. She said that in the 11 years humanity had spent in the Council, they had watched the same pattern repeat itself over and over. New species arrived. They were given provisional status. They were treated with condescension, subjected to unfair trade practices, denied meaningful participation, and eventually, either broken into submission or sanctioned into isolation when they objected. The Council called this process integration. The humans had a different word for it. They called it what it was. She said that humanity's intelligence network had not just been watching the Council, it had been watching the provisional members, the species that were too small, too new, too different to fight back. And what they had seen had made them angry in a way that went beyond their own mistreatment. There was a species called the Fenari, she said, who had been provisional members for 22 years and had been denied full membership 7 times despite meeting every requirement in the Charter. There was a species called the Torvan, who had been sanctioned for refusing to adopt Dravosi trade protocols that would have bankrupted their economy. There was a species called the Lissith who had simply given up and withdrawn from the Council entirely after decades of marginalization. We are not doing this just for us, she said. We are doing this because someone has to, and we are the first species in this Council's history that has the power to. I sat in that small room on that small ship and looked at this tired woman who had just told me that her species had spent 11 years quietly becoming the most dangerous civilization in the galaxy. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to force a 9,000-year-old institution to treat its members fairly. I did not know what to say, so I said the only honest thing I could think of. I said I was sorry, not on behalf of the Council, because I did not have the authority to apologize for anyone but myself. I said I was sorry, because I had been the one keeping the records. I had been the one who could have seen this coming, who could have flagged the pattern of mistreatment, who could have raised the alarm about the way the Council treated its provisional members. It was my job to see these things, and I had failed. She looked at me for a long time after I said that. Then she reached across the table and put her hand on mine. It was a strange gesture from a being whose species had just humiliated the most powerful military alliance in the galaxy. But it was not a gesture of power. It was a gesture of something I did not have a word for in my language. The closest translation I can find is this: the recognition of shared failure and the possibility of shared repair. She told me that she did not blame me personally. She said that systems are more powerful than individuals, and that the Council's contempt for smaller species was not the fault of any single archivist. But she said that the system had to change, and that the terms she had presented were the beginning of that change. I brought the terms back to the Council. There was debate. There was resistance. There was pride. The Dravosi delegation fought against every clause. Several other species argued that accepting terms from a species that had attacked a Council flotilla would set a dangerous precedent. But the mathematics were clear, the intelligence was undeniable, and the 3 oldest species in the Council, the Rathani, the Korval, and the Yenshu, voted yes immediately and without reservation. Sayul, the Rathani ambassador, said only that his species had waited a very long time for someone to force this conversation, and that they were grateful it had happened before the alternative became necessary. He did not explain what the alternative was. He did not need to. The vote passed. The terms were accepted. Earth became a full member of the Galactic Council. The independent oversight body was established within 60 days, with representatives from every member species, including 3 former provisional members who had never before been invited to participate in Council governance. The Fenari received full membership the following month. The Torvan sanctions were reviewed and lifted. The Lissith were invited to return. I completed my archive entry on what the Council officially designated the sole sovereignty incident. I sat at my station, the same station where I had filed the original sanctions vote under minor enforcement actions, and I stared at the classification field for a long time. I deleted existential threat event. I typed something new. I typed First Contact, revised, because I had finally understood what Okafor had been trying to tell me. We thought First Contact was the day we met humanity, the day their ships appeared at the edge of Council space, and they asked, politely and with great enthusiasm, if they could join our community of stars. We recorded that day, celebrated it, filed it away, and moved on. We believed the story was complete. We were wrong. First contact is not the day you meet a species. First contact is the day you actually see them. The day you stop looking past them, stop talking over them, stop filing them under categories that make them small enough to ignore. First contact is the moment you recognize that the being standing in front of you is not what you assumed, not what you expected, not what your comfortable prejudices told you they would be. It took us 11 years and a 4-minute war to open our eyes. I am told that, by human standards, we got off easy. I believe them, because the humans could have taught us this lesson with fire. They could have burned through our fleets, shattered our stations, brought the council to its knees, and dictated their terms from the wreckage of everything we had built. Instead, they disabled 32 ships without taking a single life. They presented terms that asked for fairness rather than dominance. They used their power not to destroy the system that had mistreated them, but to force it to become something better, something worthy of the community it claimed to be. That is what I learned about humanity. They are not the most dangerous species in the galaxy because of their weapons, their technology, or their intelligence. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy because when they finally had the power to burn everything down, they chose to build something instead. And that, for the record, is the most terrifying thing I have ever documented.